It doesn't seem to matter how long you're at this process, the process of world building. Inevitably, you are going to run into some new things, the need to create some new things that you haven't messed with before. And if you've been working on something that you've kind of been toiling with, whether mentally or physically, for a long time, it can feel a little strange or bewildering, or even like you don't have your feet underneath you when you start to really drive into something new. And it's kind of this strange obstacle because so much of our process as artists and world builders is difficult. And the nice part about building a world is that in general, once you've started kind of the first pieces, you always have some groundwork laid. It's almost relaxing to me. It's reassuring and encouraging to me because I know that I can start at one of probably 6 dozen different locations in my mythology or my stories, and I could just decide I wanted to write there tonight. Most nights, I continue to work on the novel where it actually is right now, but there are days where it's like, no, I'm going to go write a short story about what death actually looks like in this world. Like if there is a guide from, for the souls of the dead or the departed. Sometimes I'll go back and write stories about the first primordial eldritch beings that existed. And the fact that I've got enough groundwork laid means I can basically just jump in at any one of these locations. And that's it's almost scaffolding that you construct for yourself. And it makes the whole process, I don't know, easier? I would say more fun, but it's not even about fun. It's really just about ease of sliding into something. And because of that, it can often feel a little bit more bewildering when we do finally come to a blank page. Because that's a skill. Working from nothing is a skill, different from all of the other artistic skills. And if you are spending a lot of time working on things that don't require that of you, then when you come back to it, it's going to kind of blindside you, or at least have that potential. So I am starting to work on this area of my world. It's called the Cleftlands. And basically, it's this region on the far side of this gigantic forest, which is up on a bluff, on a mesa. And it's very arid. The wind is just desiccating things all the time. And there's a lot of travelers that come through the region. There's a lot of things to, not really mine as in like ore, but there's a lot of things to mine from the region. So a lot of travelers and merchants and things like that come through. But there is a group of people who live here permanently, and they don't really have a name yet. That's kind of where we are with the story so far. Is I don't know a ton about them. We ran into them at one point in the first novel, and they haven't really come back up. We're in novel 3. I can think of them pretty similarly to, if you've read Lord of the Rings, in the Return of the King, the Rohirrim are guided to Minas Tirith through this kind of back path by the Woses, the Wild Men, the Druidine. And they pretty much show up then, and they don't show up anywhere else in the novels. Now, they're super important in the background of the lore and the Silmarillion and things like that and Unfinished Tales. But these people are kind of that same ilk, that they show up at one point in the story, and then they're not relevant later. And I know some people might sit there and think about that fact and be like, well, like, why would you do that? Like, don't bring them in if they're not important. But for me, part of the beauty of building a large world is that you get to seed it with all kinds of things that might be relevant, might not be relevant. And, if when my novels are released, they will probably not be for everyone, because there's going to be a lot of components like that. The goal for me was to create a world that feels like it can be something you get lost in, where it's infinitely deeper than it appears to be on the surface. And so I didn't want to write a short novel that is pithy and gets to the point right away. I wanted to weave a tapestry of all of these different characters and cultures and peoples. Because of that, very seldom do I come to something where it's like, oh, I don't really know much about them. But with these people, that's the case. And so, by the way, my name's Zach. I haven't really started doing any drawing yet. We're like 5 minutes in. But this is just kind of paving the way for things. So if you like world building content, the rambles of somebody who's been doing it for a long time and just chewing apart how to come up with ideas, please consider liking and subscribing. It truly does help, and the channel's in a good spot right now with momentum and whatnot, so I'm kind of just excited because the more it continues to grow, the more I can do, the more time I can invest. So that's my whole pitch. Let's move on. So this group of people right now, I just loosely refer to as the Cleftlanders. I don't know a ton about them. They are probably human. That's kind of the implication that I've gotten through the story. They're extraordinarily tall. Like, their average height is about 7 feet, and they're really lanky. So there's a lot of cultures in my world that are really divergent body types and body styles, but these are very tall, very lanky, and kind of, skinny. The ones would have been called string bean back when I was growing up. And they don't speak. They communicate entirely via sign language. And I don't know that it's going to be like American Sign Language. That seems kind of silly. It does seem like one of those things that if it was ever animated, like, we would just do that because that would be easiest. And because of that, they wear, or maybe in connection to that, they wear masks. So their faces are basically never exposed. You can't read any emotion. They don't have any kind of communication that's happening via their lips or expressions. So they all wear masks. And I've been just in the last day or so starting to kind of toy with that. Like, what do the masks look like? In my mind, they've kind of been these abstract things. And of course, when you start putting stuff down for the first time, it can often be disorienting, because when we start to put stuff down for the first time, you find that most of what's happening in your mind is generally emotion and not actually related to reality. This is one of those crux reasons, by the way, why it's so difficult for new artists, because they're like, I see this in my head and then I can't get it down. I'm obviously not cut out to be an artist. That's just like, nobody has that skill at the beginning. Well, some people do, but it's very, very, very rare. Most of the artists that you see are not capable of simply taking something that they see in their head and then putting it down onto paper. That's a very difficult skill for most people to develop, and you are not alone in that. So as I started to put these down, like, some of them, like this one is just like, what is going on? Like, I don't like that at all. This one's just kind of goofy. I kind of like these ones, like, they're a little bit strange. This one, with the idea of like a cutout chunk of wood over one of the eyes and this little tapestry folding down. But I'm aware of a couple things as I'm starting to build these guys. And this is going to be kind of some of the stuff that I want to talk about for this session, especially if you find yourself needing to create a new culture from, kind of the ground up. I would recommend some of the things that I just talked about, which is I would recommend having like a bulleted list of traits. I would recommend having an understanding of some of the fundamental pieces of where they live and what general normal life looks like. You don't have to go too far in depth. And you can start from kind of any location. On these guys, I mostly had the land already developed. So for me, the most logical place to build from was, if they live here, what are going to be some things that they're going to have to endure? It's a pretty arid region. It's a pretty warm region, so they don't wear, a ton of clothes. I decided to throw in just one facet that kind of makes them strange, which I often do. And these are facets that can be really easy to manipulate later on, so don't feel like you have to stick to them. But let's explore that for a moment. So for me, again, with this group, the facet that I introduced that was a little bit strange was they don't speak. So everything has to be handled via sign language. By the way, very intriguing to come up with that idea in the middle of writing the novel and then be like, crap, how do I write? How do I write characters that don't speak? Initially I was kind of like, well, I can just have, the dialogue essentially say, like, he signed, welcome to our land or something. But that didn't feel quite right. But it also didn't feel quite right to, like, take the time and be like, he signed these motions and, so-and-so was trying to translate. So I'm not sure that I came up with a good solution. And frankly, it's been, it's probably been a year and a half since I finished that novel. So I would have to go back and take a good peek. But that was one of the traits. That was kind of an interesting trait that I came up with there. What are some other ones you could come up with? What if you have a culture that the entire culture is vegetarian? Depending on what kind of world you're in, sci-fi, fantasy, how you're putting things together, that can bring up a whole bunch of kind of interesting questions on how they're solving stuff. So I actually did that. I didn't mean to come back to my own stuff, but just for a moment, the floating city that I've mentioned a couple times on here, Spirek, that's just part of their culture, is they decided when they went up into the clouds that they were not going to eat meat anymore. At least that's kind of how they tell the story. The reality is that they couldn't find like a really great sustainable way with such limited pasture lands and whatnot to actually have livestock up in the sky. And so they just moved away from it. They keep very limited livestock, you know, things like eggs and a couple goats and some sheep for milk. But then as the stories were told in subsequent generations, it became like this moral thing. You know, we don't eat meat because it's immoral to eat meat. But that's not where it started. It started from, well, this is really difficult for us to do, so we're just going to modify our lifestyle. We have a much easier time with the use of magic and technology growing fruits and vegetables. And so we're just going to modify our diet and do that instead. And so it changes over time. So yeah, you could have a whole society that is vegetarian, and then you can play with that. And obviously, you know, that's kind of a trite thing, but it can be something that just makes a culture a little bit different. You could do the opposite, of course. You could have a culture that consumes only meat. We have some of these on our planet. I think of a lot of the like native tribes and peoples in North America, like up into very northern Canada and whatnot. I don't know the actual names of a lot of these people groups. Inuit is what's coming to my mind, but if that is not the correct term, I certainly don't want to be offensive. But there's a lot of those kinds of people groups who, you know, basically the only place they can get vitamin C is from something strange like eating narwhal, which might sound very odd to to some folk. But, you know, you do what you got to do. So that would be something that you could introduce. I think lifespan is another one that's really interesting to introduce as far as like a unique trait of a people group. What if you have a people group, like we explore in fantasy all the time, people groups that live extraordinarily long lives. But imagine playing with a group of people who only live to be 30. Like that was just part of the race. You could obviously, like I'm doing a little bit here, you can play with different body structures. This group of people is really, really tall and lanky, but I've got some other groups in my world that have 6 fingers and 6 toes on each hand, and they're short and squat. I've got some even smaller creatures that we used to, when I first started creating this stuff, used to colloquially refer to as twinkles, which just sounds so goofy now as an almost 40-year-old dude, but they were mostly just like these super cute little sprite characters, and they've evolved, and they are now a little bit different. The sprites, which are kind of the elvish stand-in in my stories, essentially they're connected to a kind of plant life. And most of the ones we run into are connected to trees, so they're exceptionally long-lived. They can actually be replanted if they die. But then as I kind of expanded that race out, I got into, well, what if you have sprites that are connected to things that are much smaller, like a rose bush? So they might only live the length of life of a rose bush, and then that continues to go down into like annual flowers. And so like there are sprites that are absolutely tiny, and they basically like wake up each year, or they're reborn each year, and they live for just a single season. Those kinds of traits are going to really change how your people group work. You could have a race that sings, like this one, you know, communicates via sign language and no speaking. You could have one that sings only. You could have one that has dual voices. You could have one that communicates telepathically. You could have one that only communicates in written form. Imagine how strange that might be. Oh, what if they were magical and like they wrote in the air, and like that's how that could be really intriguing, because you could actually have the magic like translate, like they write something in the air and it floats there, and then like slowly interprets itself for the other people group to understand it. I like that. That sounds goofy. That would be kind of fun. So right now what I'm doing, by the way, is just playing with a bunch of like designs, and I'll continue to develop these. And yeah, so that those are kind of some of the like goofy things that you can come up with, things that are going to make it a little bit more intriguing, perhaps, when you're trying to create almost like a blank slate people group. And I think it's probably a good exercise to do this every once in a while, because it's just good for flexing like your muscles and whatnot and figuring out how things exist. I do think it's probably worth talking about for just a moment, like why I didn't just go with elves and dwarves, because I could have, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And my reasoning was actually just I was young. When I started doing this, when I started building these out, I was 14 or 12, somewhere in that neighborhood. It's very difficult to check now. And I was probably just a mix of excited about the prospect of building my own world and also arrogant, and was just like, no, I don't need to do what other people did. Like, I'm just going to do my own thing. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying like, yes, I was youthful and arrogant and like I would have done a better job if I hadn't been. Like, I am happy with what I've created and what I've brainstormed for all these years. And I do not regret that I went about it the way that I did. Like, you can only do what you did, and chewing on the past like that is not going to be productive. But I do think that I probably went a little bit further than I needed to. And now, you know, as an older dude, there is a part of me that kind of wishes that I had stuck with just using the races that people know, because you don't have to explain as much. And I think that's the beautiful part about using like the tried and true traditional races and tropes, is people know what to expect. You know, if you just say like, yes, like there was an elf, in almost all scenarios, people are going to go, yes, a long-lived, elegant, kind of snobby race. And your elves might be different. They might be more unique and particular to your world, but that's at least a starting point that people can work off of. And the same is true for dwarves, for gnomes, for goblins, for orcs, for anything like that. And so you basically just save yourself a lot of time by just bringing in those tropes. And there's nothing wrong with it. Again, I know that, you know, there might be a little bit of a stigma where it's like, like a real world builder is going to build all their own things. Like, no. A real world builder is a person who dedicates the time to world building, who finds satisfaction and joy in it, not one who follows some stupid set of arbitrary rules. So don't let yourself get drugged down by those things. So most of what I've done here is I've just decided these are the things that I want to work on, and so they're the things that I've worked on. It's not really much more complicated than that. And again, if I do this in the future, if I keep going and tell a different story at some point, I will probably do one that just has the traditional stuff. If for no other reason now, then it'll just be a break from having to create everything from absolute scratch. That said, I actually have decided that I am going to essentially put in like a historic race of elves and dwarves in my story. Not call them that. I'm going to call them something different. And they're basically never going to show up. It's going to be like there's legends about them existing, and they're kind of like legendary feud with one another. And I'm mostly just going to do that as like an ode to Tolkien and to the ancestral confines of the fantasy genre that I love so much. But they won't really play any role in it. So yeah, if you find that you would much rather just build from or build off of, or even just straight up use the kind of traditional things, just do it. There is no reason why you have to do what I'm doing or what others are doing. And if anybody tries to tell you that it's like somehow less, you're less of a real world builder, whatever the heck that means. Just, say something that you want to be rude, but it's actually like polite, and just move on. Like, they're probably just jealous because they're not working on what they want to be working on, or they're not happy with their own success. Don't trouble yourself with such people. It's not worth your time. So another thing that I do want to mention here, and it's something I don't think I've talked about at all on this channel in any of my world building stuff, is cultural appropriation. A lovely, fun topic to talk about, but something that I think is prudent, especially working on these masks. You might have noticed, and it would not be silly for you to notice, that there are some cultures in our world that might have totemic or mask-built structures that are similar in some way to what I'm doing here. And that's something that you have to be cognizant of, or at least I think you should be cognizant of. Now, I'm not going to steal masks from traditional Southeast Asian cultures or from North American natives or from African cultures. That is not going to be my intention. In fact, at this point, I haven't even gone and looked up any references, but I am not so, ignorant to assume that I'm going to just be devoid of appropriating certain things in my world. So, in my mind, it would be wrong for me to just go and take some African masks or some Native American masks and just be like, these are now in my world, they're a fantasy thing. It's not my culture. I don't know if that changes it tremendously, but I just wouldn't do that. The first reason is I think it's probably wrong and it's probably just stepping on somebody else's toes. The second reason is it's lazy. And for me, so much of the joy here is the creating of things. So I would rob myself of the potential joy and creativity of building my own things. So it just doesn't appeal to me at all. I also don't think that you can divorce yourself entirely from the things that just you've seen in your life. And so I know that there are things that I'm going to implement that are, I'm going to think I did them on my own, and then somebody's going to come along and be like, that 100% reminds me of a Cherokee tribe thing. And I'm going to be like, oh, you know what? You're right. I did see that at one point. And I'm not trying to dodge that entirely. You're going to be influenced by the things that you see in your world. That's how humans work. That's how our brains work. You can't totally, break yourself away from that. That said, I think you should just try to be conscious of it at a base level. Make sure you're not copying things directly from cultures that are not part of your upbringing or your life. And maybe even if they are, just try to be shrewd and wise about it. You're often going to find that things are going to be a little bit more exciting if you stretch a little bit outside of what you know and what you're comfortable with. So for me, I like to lean on some of the cool things in our world because there are a lot of cool things. And you always have the possibility too, when you're being respectful and you're drawing from a lot of inspirations, you have the possibility of being honoring to some of those other cultures that you enjoy. Just be aware that there might be critiques, that people will probably have thoughts and opinions, and they are, of course, allowed to have those. For me, a lot of it just comes down to intention. Make sure you're not doing something because you're not thinking or you're unaware of it, and try to be respectful of other people groups. Probably not a good idea to base a people group off of something in our own world, a culture off of something in our own world, and then make them look really stupid or make them the bad guy. If you're going to do something like that, I would highly recommend doing it with a social class or something that, people, something that's basically not going to be subject to bigotry and things like that. If it's very different to be the people that have this color skin are bad in your fantasy novel versus the people who decide to do terrible things are terrible. And it's yeah, no, that's a lot better. You look at Saruman or Sauron in Lord of the Rings, and it's they're not bad or evil because they're a different race than everyone else, which they are, by the way. They are not human. They are both Maiar. They are of a different race than everyone else. But that's not what makes them bad. What makes them bad is that they are terrible people and they make terrible decisions. They're very, very selfish. They're very self-absorbed and self-important. And they do terrible, terrible things. That's what makes them terrible. And so, yeah, my point of caution there would just be make sure that if you are pulling in any real world relevant kind of references and whatnot, that you are being respectful and aware of what you're doing. And, also brace for impact, because there's a decent chance that if you're showing your stuff to anyone else, they'll have comments about it. You're never going to get through anything without offending anyone. That's just part of, being alive. It doesn't matter how kind you try to be, how aware you try to be. If you are producing something and putting it out into public space, you are going to offend someone at some point. That said, you don't have to put your world out there. Don't feel like you need to. And if you do, and people get offended by something, take a moment, reflect, and then move on. I've had moments before where people have been upset about something I produced artistically, and I try to like my initial response is always pretty much like shove off, like whatever, it's mine, it's art. And then, especially now being a little bit older, I try to take a moment and like think about it and be like, okay, like was there a point to something they said? And if there is, then I try to adapt. But I also, I'm not producing my art to make everyone else around me happy. Like at a fundamental level, it's got to make me happy and not make other people's lives worse. And once we've established those two items, then I can kind of do whatever the heck I want. And for me, a lot of the time, that's making monsters and eldritch horrors and robots. And you know what? They're probably not making anybody's life worse. I don't know that my robots have offended anybody, which is good, I suppose. Robot lives will be important someday, maybe, but at this moment, they're just a figment of our imagination. They might not always be. We'll see. Hopefully not a concern I have to deal with. I feel like it's been enough weird, world-changing events in my lifetime. I'm kind of, if we could have a couple years of like nothing of note happened this year, that would be lovely. Don't see it happening, but it would be lovely. So, but yeah, I have not had a chance or maybe even a need to talk about that in prior episodes so much, but I did want to mention it here since obviously some of these masks, this one in particular, do look like they could potentially be mimicking things in our own culture. I'm not doing that on purpose, but I love learning about things in our world, and so inevitably I am going to incorporate bits and pieces of things. Oh, one last thing there. If you are referencing our world, reference a bunch of things. Don't just look up one particular culture's masks, for example. Look up 15, take different pieces from each of those that you enjoy and you find convincing and interesting, and implement those. And that will almost always put you in a better spot. If you are able to mimic from a lot of things, it's going to be better than if you're mimicking from just a single thing. All right. So I'm going to get pretty close here to finishing up this page of masks today. And I think I want to go a slightly different direction with our last few minutes together here. When you are building something new, I want you to try to detach yourself entirely from expectations. In general, I think expectations are a bad thing for us as artists. I don't know that I can actually defend that particularly well. I'm also not going to take a moment to try to do it here. But I would encourage you that when you are trying to build something from scratch, something new, you're devising a new race, a new culture, a new location, do what you can to take your expectations and just shove them in a box and lock it for the duration of that process. Because there are few things that are going to hamper your creativity and prevent you from moving forward more than having an expectation that it turns out good or cool or well, or that your time was efficiently spent. You might spend a ridiculous amount of time coming up with new ideas for a fantasy race, or for a race of aliens, or for how a spaceship works. And I would encourage you to try as hard as you can to detach yourself from expectations. Do not care whether it turns out good or bad. Don't even try to make it good. Don't try to make it bad either, but don't try to make it anything. Just try to solve the problem and move forward with it. What you will do is you will open up the ability for ideas that your conscious mind would have never let see the light of day. And this is because our brain tries very hard to keep us from pain. And if you are the kind of person who comes up with a bad idea, or you try something and it doesn't work out at first and you feel bad about it, you will start trending toward avoiding anything that could make you feel that way. And if you can find a way to detach yourself from expectations, you will make it much easier for you to come up with additional ideas. I've had some people, even recently, this has been something I've had come up for a very long time, but I even had a comment this week on one of my videos, or on the weekly prompts actually, about like, how do you come up with these ideas? And I don't have a problem coming up with ideas. It's something that comes very, very naturally to me. And it's not that I'm special. It's not that I've got some crazy skill that you don't. It is almost entirely linked to I feel no emotion when I come up with a bad idea. Like, I will sit down and draw something, and if it doesn't turn out well, I just move on. If I'm typing and the idea doesn't work out, I will just move on. If I need to have it solved in that moment, I'll sit there and I'll chew on it for a while. And if I can't, then I'll go somewhere else until my mind kind of sifts through the pieces and sorts through what I need to do. If I can't remember the name of a town while I'm writing, or I go, oh crap, I need a character here, I will literally just create parentheses, put it there, and when I come back on an editing pass, I'll add it then. I do whatever I can to keep myself moving forward, to make sure that forward progress is always occurring. And I do think it comes a little bit more naturally for me, but I've also done a lot of work to try to make sure that I have the ability to continue creating ideas. And I really think the biggest one is I don't care if I come up with a bad idea. I am under no illusion that every one of my ideas needs to be good. I don't feel any impact to my personhood or self-worth, or if I'm a real artist, if my ideas are bad. I know that for every single good thing I come up with, there is a certain amount of bad ideas I'm going to have to sift through and figure out. You know, it's kind of like, let me grab this. Oh, why are you stuck? So think about it like this, right? You know, let's say I'm trying to come up with like a good idea. And like every idea I come up with has, let's say, like a 15% chance of being good, right? So when I make my first sketch, like there is a chance, there's a 15% chance that this idea is going to be good. But let's say it's not good. So I go on to the next one, and there's a 15% chance here that this one will be good. No, it's not going to stack up to being 30%. That's not how percentages work. I know. I wish that's how it works. It doesn't. Crazy statistics. So the next idea, there's 15% chance that that'll work. And I just don't care if on Monday, this is what it looks like to get where I want. On Tuesday, that's what it takes to get to where I want. And on Thursday, I never even get there. Because that's how odds work. The fact is that like that 15% chance doesn't mean that after 6.5, it'd actually be 6.2, 6.66 repeating, right? Times you would hit 100%. That's just not how it works. It means you can nail it the first time. It means you can never nail it. And so I just know that if I stick to it, pretty much eventually I'm going to get there. But there's another thing too, is that after you do a certain amount of these, this percentage goes up and you get a little bit closer. And this percentage goes up. And when I think back to who I was as an artist historically, I always felt like there was about a 25% chance that any piece I made turned out the way that I wanted to, especially when it came to paintings. And that was just heartbreaking because paintings take so long to make. So it was like, if there's a 50% chance that my painting's going to turn out well, then like I basically have to do 2 paintings every time to get a good one. And that just felt like crap. But I found that when I lowered my expectations, what it really allowed me to do was keep working more frequently. And what that has yielded is that percentage just keeps going up and up and up. So now, like for my world building stuff, in general, I'm at like a, you know, for this quick stuff like this, I'm at like a 50% chance. Like half the time the thing turns out well. But the nice part is like this page has so many drawings on it that 50% of these turning out well is like great. For a long-term drawing, I'm at about a like 80% rate, you know, but even with my little sketches of the robots and the character drawings I do, like I've got a higher rate than I used to have, but it's still like it's not all the way there. You know, we're at like 75, 80%. So like I just sat down for a session before this to just draw a robot, record it, maybe use it for a sketchbook session. I'm not sure I'll use it. I didn't like the drawing when it finished. And that's just what happens. But the 5 or 6 or 7 that I did before, I enjoyed. And that's just how it's going to happen. So that's kind of the thing I want to close off on, is just try to lower your expectations, and don't hear that in a negative light. Hear that as freedom. It is freeing to lower your expectations, and it will often allow you to work more and work harder and work longer, all of which yields better results. if for no other reason than just there's more work to pull from. But in all likelihood, it's going to actually increase the quality that you're working with anyway. So on that note, thanks for being here. I hope this was beneficial to you. We kind of went in a couple different directions today. I would love to hear in the comments below what of them you found interesting or appreciated and what you'd like me to talk about next time. Thank you to my patrons as well, who are on the screen right now. The Patreon and the Discord are both linked in the description down below. If you do not have an artistic community, I would strongly encourage you to check out the Discord server. It's a small, sweet community. It's totally free. Nobody makes money off of it. It's just for community. All right. Have a good one, y'all. Have fun designing a new culture, a new people, a new group. We'll see you soon.